Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for another miniature game from the recent Women's Grand Prix, which has been played between 2024 and 2025 and ultimately conceded 2 spots for the women's candidates, which will be held later in the year. Those spots have gone to Alexandra Goryachkina and to Chinese Grandmaster Zhu Jina, 2 very, very strong players. The game we're going to check out today is from the second leg of the Grand Prix, which was held in Shymkent in Kazakhstan. And the players are, with the white pieces, International Master Stavrula Tsolakidou, Greece #1 female player, very strong player, also a very nice and sympathetic player. I met her in a couple of tournaments in the Grand Prix and she was very, very nice, very agreeable to talk to, and also a fearsome player on the board. With the black pieces, one of the Chinese top players, a former world champion, Tan Zhongyi, who is also a regular in the Women's Grand Prix, but however had to drop out for a couple of tournaments because she played the final of the Women's World Championship against Chu Wenjun in April, very recently. She lost. But this game is before. It's of the Shymkent Grand Prix in 2024, November. Let's get on with the game. It's a miniature, 25 move game, and I think you'll find it quite instructive. I actually learned quite a few things from this game, so I'm sure you guys out there will also be able to learn. So for this game, Stavrula opened with c4, and after g3 and bishop g2, she went for this system, Catalan-Reti system. Now, Tan Zhongyi played a very interesting move. If Tan had just played knight to f6, then after d4, Stavrula would have got in the Catalan opening. Maybe it was her idea. Maybe on the other hand, she was just going to play b3 and go for a simple Reti double fianchetto opening, which is also possible. I don't know. But Tan Zhongyi nips the idea in the bud by playing d4, already claiming some space, preventing knight to c3 and hoping to follow up with knight to c6 or maybe c5, maybe e5, trying to get a grip on the center. Of course, this is perfectly playable for both sides, and a lot of times it could end up being BENONI reversed colors defense. However, black does have the grip in the center, albeit he has spent some time moving pawns. But if white doesn't play with precision, white can end up in a worse position. So both sides have to be careful and especially know their theory. Now, if Tsolakidou doesn't know her theory, she shouldn't allow the idea of d4. For the moment, she plays knight to f3, and of course c5 is now possible, but Tan Zhongyi prefers knight to c6, castle, and bishop c5, cementing the pawn on d4, and the knight can even come to e7, which will allow us at some point to play f6 and e5 if we need to. d3, and black goes a5, which is a sensible move, taking out of the equation any b4s. And here's what I'm talking about when I mentioned before playing with precision. Tsolakidou already here makes a small mistake. She plays knight b to d2, which is not correct. It's not accurate. The accurate way of playing here is either to go knight to a3 with the idea knight to b5 or knight to c2, from where on c2 it pressures the pawn on b4, it prepares e3, and also it prepares a3, rook b1 and b4. The other alternative would be to play e3 straight away, and after knight g to e7, maybe again knight to a3. So it was very important to play knight to a3 in this position. Now, of course, Stavrula is a very strong international master. She's stronger than myself. My peak rating was 24.31 and she's already 24.39 and she's much younger than myself. And I peaked at 28 years old. So she knows what she's doing. So why did she make this inaccuracy? There might be several reasons. She might not remember. But most likely, before the game she prepared different scenarios depending on what Tan Zhongyi was going to play. In some of these scenarios, the knight was going to a3, and others would go to d2. And maybe when you prepare a lot and then you get a new position on the board, your mind is a bit confused. And this happened to all of us. Even at high level, this sometimes happens. And you're not quite sure and you just go for the safe option. And in certain positions, the safe option is not good enough. So knight b2, inaccurate. Black plays e5. Knight to b3. Bishop to e7. The knight is actually very badly placed against Benoni structures on b3. Actually, black threatens a4. So white played a4, but this leaves a gaping hole here on b4. And now white has no chance of playing a3 and b4, which is the typical Benoni rupture on the queen side. So now I think black is already quite better. Okay, bishop to f5 is okay. This is good because it sort of sidesteps e3 now because of the weakness on the d3 square. And here comes the second inaccuracy. According to the computer, the correct move here was bishop to d2. And this is a move which is very difficult to see and to play. It's not at all obvious that bishop to d2 followed by queen to e1 would hit the pawn on a5 with enough strength to sort of provoke b6, which would then allow some tactical ideas on the long diagonal. Very difficult to see bishop to d2 because normally the d2 square is used by one of the knights. Stavrula played knight to e1, trying to get some play with f4. But already, check out her pieces on the queen side. They're not entirely well placed. And I'm sure if Stavrula sees this video, she will be the first one to confirm that things were not going well for her at this point. I'm sure that here she is not comfortable at all. Hi, my name is Michael Rehal, and I'm an international master and FIDE trainer. And I'd like to welcome you to my chessable course, 1E4, a positional repertoire for club players. This positional course is based heavily on two of my favorite 1E4 players. Former world champion Anatoly Karpov and top English grandmaster Michael Adams. The moves are simple, the structures are sound but aggressive at the same time, and you won't find any chaos or dynamics in the lines, but sound attacks based on solid opening principles. I'm going to offer you some unique perspective in some of the different defenses black can take on, and after you finish the course, you'll be well prepared to play against any O2E player with good results with the white pieces. Knight to f6, f4, and now a very good move by Tan Zhongyi, e4. Maybe threatening e3, and basically with the idea of playing in the center against these weakly placed pieces. Now, at this point, Stavrula, after these inaccuracies, had her last chance to get something going. And I'm sure she saw the move, but either she didn't trust it, or most likely she saw the move, she saw her own move, and possibly thought her own move was okay. She played knight to c2, which is just too slow. She does theoretically threaten pawn takes pawn, followed by the capture of d4, but this will not be possible. So therefore, knight to c2 is not good. What she could have done is to play g4, sacrificing a lateral pawn for the center pawn. And the game would have been something like this. Now, I still think black is better here. The computer gives black the advantage, but things are a bit more murky now. The knight will come to d3, the bishop might come to f4. At least white is getting some squares for her pieces. Yeah, g4 had to be played. She played knight to c2, and a very good move by Tan Zhongyi. Probably Stavrula thought that e3 was forced, and now she could think of taking here and taking here. It's an option. Or she might have thought that pawn takes pawn was forced, against which she'd take back, and she might get some play now on the e file. And also the long diagonal is opened up. But Tan Zhongyi has a very good understanding of the initiative, and she plays queen to d7, just preparing long castle. And after pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, Tan Zhongyi had already noticed that there's going to be some very good tactics for her if white captures on d4 because of the pin on this long diagonal. So this is very well played by Tan Zhongyi. For example, in the game, Stavrula played knight c takes d4. However, if she'd played bishop takes bishop first and then captured the pawn, then for example, here's a very, very nice tactic. If queen takes, bishop c5 is a wonderful move. Very, very nice move. This move is actually spectacular. It's pinning the king, so the queen can't capture the knight. The queen can't capture the queen because of the pin. And the most important idea is that if knight takes bishop, the queen is hanging on d4. This is a move which is not easy at all to see a few moves in advance, unless you know the tactical pattern perfectly. Actually, I was surprised by this one. So it's something I didn't learn because I knew it from beforehand, but I hadn't seen this tactical pattern in many, many years. So it was nice to find this in the game. Yeah, so Stavrula played knight takes d4 straight away. Bishop takes d2. Now the king is no longer pinned, but we can still continue the attack. Queen takes d4, trying to exchange pieces, but of course, queen to c check and castle. And now look at all the threats. Black has knight to g4, rook to d8. The bishop can come to c5 if the knight moves. The other rook to e8. All this for just a pawn. And white is underdeveloped. So black is doing very well here. Bishop to e3. Bishop to b4. Taking a few squares away, protecting the pawn on a5 and threatening to put the rooks in the center. Queen to d3. Rook a to d8. Now, you're going to learn something which is quite important now. So, very rarely it will be a good idea to block an attack against your king or your queen with a piece. It's going to be very rarely going to be a good idea to pin your own minor piece. Now, obviously, Stavrula knows this perfectly well, but she probably just couldn't find another decent alternative. The computer suggests to move the queen away with queen to c2 and at some point give up the pawn on a4 and try and hold this position where, of course, black is better, but the game is still on. She played bishop to d4, and as I said before, it's not generally a good idea to block your own pieces, although she does think that after e3 maybe she can get the king to f2 and more or less sort her position out. But things are not going to work. Rook f e8. The computer says that c5 holds here with the idea of queen to b5, but that's very difficult to see, and black is still clearly better. Stavrula is very worried about knight to g4 and knight to e3, or even rook to e3, so she plays h3, but now the knight comes into e4. And now they're starting to become some threats. Knight c3, c5 is actually a very serious threat, as we shall see. Now, after king to h2, white is dead lost. The computer suggests that rook a to f1, protecting this rook, which you'll see now is very important. Knight to c5, knight takes, bishop takes, and now e3, and it seems that everything is more or less protected. We can still knock off the pawn on a4, and this position is better for black. I think that at some point, the pressure in the center will earn black another pawn, and she will go into the rook ending with an extra pawn. Would that be enough to win the game? It's hard to say, but this was Stavrula's best chance to defend. Instead of that, she played king to h2, and now Tan Zhongyi played knight to c5, very nice move. And unfortunately, Stavrula had to resign. If she drops back with the queen, then she just loses a piece and it's game over. But if she captures the knight, we capture back, and after e3, the rook is hanging on f3. And that is why she had to play rook to f1 instead of king to h2. Of course, Tsolakidou didn't have a good day in the office on this day. And this is understandable. Tsolakidou is a very strong player. She's won multiple tournaments. She will become a grandmaster for sure. I'm convinced of that. But that doesn't mean that every now and then things won't go well in the opening and it just goes downhill and you sort of like try and forget the game. And this has happened to all of us as chess players. Me, I'm the first one. I'm sure all of you have had similar defeats. The thing is just to, let it go. Try to understand your mistakes, the psychology in the defeat, and just strive to become better and hope for the best in the future. And I'm bringing you these games. So I want you to see basically how a strong player takes advantage of a weak play by one of the stronger opponents. And you can use these strategies and tactics in your own games against weaker players. So I think it's useful to learn these ideas. So I hope you enjoyed this game. We still have a fourth game from the Women's Grand Prix before closing this episode and focusing on other very interesting tournaments. Last weekend I did a live session. I spent an hour playing with some of you guys. Some interesting games were played. And if you enjoy seeing that session, you can click on the live section of the YouTube channel and you'll see it there and you might enjoy some of the games. I played and then I explained. So it was a double-double. And I hope you keep improving and coming back to the channel every time I post a video. So enjoy, improve, and see you soon.